Well, good morning. It's very good to be with everyone. I believe today we should be able to finish Matthew 23 as we move through our discussion leading up to Christ's crucifixion and after his triumphant entry into Jerusalem, establishing himself as the Messiah, going through some final questioning that the Pharisees, Sadducees, and even Herodians have had for him. And he then, as we've been going through Matthew 23, it's a contrast between what they have done to God's religion, contrasted to what it's going to be like when he establishes his kingdom with his apostles being in the position of leadership. So this is not only of benefit to us today as everyday people dealing with religious elements, but we're having a crash course, a really good lesson on what proper leadership inside of religion is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to be. So we discussed, we finished up last time where he was referencing their methods of conversion and making of proselytes, and how it was that the system being so corrupted that in bringing these people in, they're not actually converting them to the Lord, but in fact converting them to a system and thus making them fanatics, making them too more child of hell than themselves. And leading on from that discussion, he points out that with the leadership and what they've done to religion had brought about a failure to recognize the real values of life. So Matthew 23, 16 through 22 is dealing with this in this section of argumentation. Jesus says, "Woe unto you, blind guides, which say, Whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? And whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing, but whosoever swears by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whoso therefore shall swear by the altar, sweareth by it, and by all things thereon. And whoso shall swear by the temple, sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. And he that shall swear by heaven, sweareth by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon." Now, this isn't the first time that we've heard this argumentation before, or this problem that's going on inside the Jewish system. Where's the first time that Jesus actually brings up?
5 or 6.
It's 5. In chapter 5, where he's building the case about swear not by the temple and swear not by this, just let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. That they were acting as though if you swear by the gold of the temple, well then, yeah, you've got to keep that promise. You've got to keep your word on that. But if you're just simply swearing by the temple itself, it is nothing. Now, this is not just something that Jesus is creating out of thin air for the sake of illustration. This is literally what they are doing. This is how they are viewing the temple. This is how they are viewing the gold that is overlaying the temple and its elements. And 3 times, I believe it is, Jesus referenced to them, ye fools and blind. 3 times, ye blind guides, ye fools and blind. Fools and blind. Verse 19, again, because of this type of presentation that they're involved in doing. Now, what is it that they are trying to do? What's the aim? What's the goal with the Pharisees here in saying, well, yeah, you can swear by this and it's stronger than if you swear by this?
Trying to get away with not keeping their commitments.
Okay, but say it a little bit louder.
Trying to get away with not keeping their commitments.
Okay. They're trying to keep from keeping these commitments, but how are they doing that? Now, you just think about it. Why would anybody want to do that in the first place? If you give somebody your word, why would you want to try to get away from it? Well, an honest and upright person would not want to do that. Go ahead.
Well, we're already seeing that they're in trouble because they are not honoring the widows.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, oh, do this, while they go and they steal the widows' houses. So they've already, it's just another example of how they're not being true to the spirit of the word.
Okay.
They're manipulating the followers by their stature. They're manipulating the word of God by usury.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using it by a sense of force because of their dress and where they place themselves.
Right.
So, just like any person of authority can be corrupt, they were quite corrupt.
Yeah, and we discussed that last time we were together. So all of that in an element of intimidation as to those that are beneath. And when we're considering these elements in saying, well, if you swear by the temple, it's different than swearing by the gold. Is it really that different? No, because they're all part of the same element. The gold is inside of the temple. And if you're swearing by the gold, then you are in fact swearing by the temple. So what we've already seen this as we were discussing in Matthew chapter 21, and how it is they're trying to break religion into compartments. Remember that in Matthew 21, how that they were in the outer court and they're charging usury to exchange the money. They're overpricing on the doves. They're hurting the poor people. But you see, we're not doing that in the temple, right? Because the temple is the holy place, most holy place. But Jesus says, no, all of this is the temple because it's attached to it. And God sees what you're doing out here in the outer court just as if you were in the most holy place. So it's a repetition of that. You cannot isolate and break these different elements into compartments and say, well, this is more important than the other. And he's going to further build on that when he gets into their tithing and their giving in just a moment. So just as we discussed, they're trying to break this down, and as well we're separating this over here. This is more important than that. And Jesus illustrates, no, all of this is intertwined. All of this is connected. So when we are questioning, thus they're losing the real value, the real purpose of coming into the temple, seeing the gold and everything that's overlaid, they're losing sight of the real value of that. Now, we need to ask ourselves the same question. As they were losing sight of the real value of the temple and being able to go there and to partake in the elements, what's the real value of us being here this morning?
To take care of the gold that is supposed to be within each one of us.
Okay, we're taking care of each other.
Spiritual benefit.
All right. So a lot of the times people will look at it from the standpoint of, well, we're commanded to be here. And that's true. But it's not simply just because God told us to be here that we're here. It's got to go deeper than that. What is the why behind us being here? What's the why behind God commanding us to come together on the first day of the week? But that we're here to honor and to glorify God and not ourselves. This is a time where we are focused on this very idea. Okay, I'm setting aside my wants and my desires, and I'm coming to this place, to this assembly with these people, with God as the center. Now, what's that supposed to do for us when we leave this place?
Carry us
We're
through.
supposed to carry that out to where when we start our day tomorrow on Monday, what's supposed to be our mentality? It's the same thing we had here. I should be ready to set aside my own desires, and that what I'm going to do throughout the day tomorrow is for the honor and glorification of God. Then also the spiritual enrichment that they were supposed to receive in going to the temple. We also are involved in spiritual enrichment edification when we come together as the Lord's people. That we are able to be uplifted that the burdens that we carry throughout the week, we're now coming into this place and into the presence of God, and we can set those things to the side. But even with that, this is not just a today thing. That as we are being spiritually enriched today, we're supposed to take this with us. And then, that we are coming together, and the value that we have is to worship, and that we're worshiping God and not ourselves. And to worship is the idea to bow down in adoration and to bow down in respect. Now, this is what religion and worship is all about. But then you look at what the Pharisees have done to it, and what the Sadducees have done to it. They have stripped it of its real value. And that by focusing in on the physical elements. Now, the physical elements are important. The temple, the gold, the candlestick, the unleavened bread, the showbread, and the incense, and everything that is inside the altar, all of that is inside, and that physical element has a spiritual application behind it, to where you're not just going through something physical, but that is all designed to get down into the inside of man, so that we're able to make adjustments. So to come here, and certainly to fail to bow down in adoration, to worship God, then I will leave here just as a Pharisee or Sadducee would, proud and arrogant. Luke 18, Jesus gives the illustration of the Pharisee that went into the temple to pray, and you just listen to how his prayer was. There's nothing wrong with him, supposedly. To the degree that he even looks over at the publican and says, I'm glad I'm not like him. That's a loss of value of what it is that God's given to us. That I will not take something from this place, from this assembly, from our time of studying, being together, that will alter my life for the better. That's what all of this is for. We're all striving to improve. And if I fail to do these things, then the assembly is going to be wasted. My time here, our time here, is going to be wasted if we're not coming together with these ideas in mind. How is today going to make me better? So even as we're considering that point of edification and thinking back to how we started this discussion on how religion is not supposed to be a burden. And that's what the Pharisees had turned it into because of their misinterpretations. Well, even if we are coming together in this assembly, and then there's something that is pointed out that ends up, targeting me as an area in my life that, okay, I'm needing to improve. We're not needing to view that as a burden. That's something that can be lifted right in the moment. That's like, okay, I hear this, I see this. I'm going to strive to make it better. So it's like how Jordan says about going to see a certain physician that you all know, that usually when you end up going to see her, she tears you down pretty heavy. And it's just like, here's the things you got wrong with you. Here's what's wrong with you, here's what's wrong with you, here's what's wrong with you. But Jordan says that even with that, in leaving, you come out feeling better. Why? Okay. It's not just the thing of she's telling you what's wrong with you, but she gives you a plan so as to get better. And that's what these assemblies are designed to do. We're going through this, looking at things that can be problematic inside of our lives, but there's a way to improve it. There's a way to make it better so that it doesn't become a load that we just carry around with us all the time. Here's just what I've got, and there's nothing we can do about it. No, all of this is designed so as to improve that mentality. But then, also considering this, to come together, miss these points, and the assembly be wasted, is that the only detriment, is that the only downfall that will come from not realizing the real value of us being here? What else is there?
Ask the question again.
All right. So the assembly will be wasted, and that we're not seeing the real value, and that I'm not taking these things that will alter my life and to make my life better. So think about the context of Matthew 23. What is at the end of this discussion?
Destruction.
Okay. It's not just a matter of the assembly will be wasted. I will lose my soul in the process. If I'm not considering these things. So just to further break down what Jesus is illustrating to them and what we need to consider as well. The value of the gift, what they were bringing to the temple and placing upon the altar. The value of the gift was not the gift. So just think about it. They were commanded, if they were able, to bring a lamb. What's special about a lamb? Nothing. It's just a lamb. So if a lamb is just a lamb, then what makes the lamb special?
Because God told them to use it.
Okay, it's what God asked for. And God said, you offer it on this altar. Now, there again, what's special about the altar?
Nothing.
It's just an altar. Anybody can build an altar. But what's special about this altar, where you're bringing your gift? It's the same thing with the lamb. This is where God commanded that the gift is to be offered. So it's the altar upon which they put the gift that is giving semblance or importance to what is being offered, because this is what God has said to do. The value of the gold of the temple was not because of the temple, but because of the presence of God in the temple. What if God's presence wasn't there? It's just another building, just like any other. So even as we are considering, so this is why this is important. Can you think of some application for this in our day and age? Just think about how people, not only our own brethren, we're going to deal with some of our brethren in a moment, but just think about people in denominations. How do they treat their building?
As the one placed in the one church to meet, and they also, so going through their worship, it's the music, it's the fog machines, it's things that God didn't ask for, so they disrespect God in that regard. But stop there.
Can this be a situation where Matthew 7:21 comes into play? You know, those who do the will of my Father. Does that summarize what's going on here?
Yeah. So when you look or when you hear different people and they use terms like the sanctuary, that's not biblical. And so like where we are today in the VFW hall, this is used for all kinds of things. But now we're using it for our assembly. And it's the fact of what we're doing with it today that brings any type of significance to it. Now you take away what we're doing today, what is this?
Just a building.
Just what? A cribbage hall, yeah. This is just any other building. Now, move that, like let's say that we were in a position and we were able to get our own building. What could we use that building for?
Anything.
Anything. It's just a building. So even right there, you have some of our brethren that they're going right into this element of what the Pharisees are doing. Oh, well, you can't do anything over here. You can't eat in the building because this is the Lord's house. Since when? I thought we were the Lord's house. I thought we were the temple today. So what is that? It's just a building.
It's them adding on words that God did not ask.
It's our own brethren adding on to and making distinctions and making laws and regulations that they shouldn't be making.
Which you couldn't do because 3 places in the New Testament talk about a church that meets in their home.
Right.
So then you couldn't even eat and
Right.
sleep in your home.
So the very place where he says, don't you have homes to eat in? It's like, well, we're meeting in our homes. So what are we supposed to do now? Exactly. So this element still comes into play with brethren today, with people today. What is an element that we're going to go through today that falls right into this trap with a lot of our own brethren? The Lord's Supper. Now we come to the most important part. Since when? No. But this mentality. Oh, this is sacred. We have got to do this. But your giving, oh, that's not as sacred. The singing that we're commanded to do, yeah, that's not as important as the altar itself. It's that same mentality. And what it is trying to wiggle out, as was mentioned before, get away from commitment that you're supposed to be observing. We are commanded to come together not just to take the Lord's Supper. We are commanded to come together to take part in all of it. Singing, praying, the sermon, the Lord's Supper, giving. All of that is what we're commanded to do. But you see what brethren are doing? They're putting themselves in the position of the Pharisees. It's like, well, we'll make excuse for this. And how will we do that? By making this more important than the other. Can't make that kind of distinction. But it's all instead, so it's all about just giving them a way out instead of just simply upholding what God has said. And what does that do to people? It puts us right back in the previous section. It makes people twofold child of hell than themselves. So when we're considering what we are involved in doing, and even with that fact of the Lord's Supper, the unleavened bread is just bread. And the grape juice is just grape juice. So that when our assembly is over, if there's leftover bread and I wanted to go and get my fill on the leftover bread, I would have every right to do that. Because it's just bread. But what is it that is actually sanctifying that bread? Is when we come together for this element. That's what sets it apart. Not the actual element itself, but it's because what God has said about it. And not only what God has said about it, but what was given for us so as to establish and institute the Lord's Supper. Well, is it just His body? It's the blood of Christ that makes that important. So just with the Lord's Supper, if Christ had not died, shed His blood, been buried, resurrected and ascended to heaven, if He had not done any of that, and then we were coming together to partake in the Lord's Supper, what are we doing? Nothing. It's just cracker and grape juice. So it's paying attention to the real values, the real element of it. What makes any of this that we're doing significant? It's because of what God has said about it. And that Christ's blood has been shed to bring about its authority. And so we do not need to get caught up in this type of game and this type of business of this is more important than the other. Listen, the blood was shed for the church, for us. The blood was shed for the New Testament, for the doctrine. The blood was shed for the Lord's Supper, the commandment that we have for giving, the commandment that we have for singing. God's blood, the blood of Christ, was shed for all of that. So it's all of the same level and the same importance. But where we get in trouble is where we start taking God's religion and start trying to twist it to where it fits us. It's happening there. It's happening around us. And if we're not careful, it can even end up happening here. And so that's why we need to watch out for this. So any thoughts, questions, comments on that line? Okay. So just as we said, what makes this assembly valuable is that we are here in the presence of God, and that the blood of Christ was established for this assembly. So when I really bow myself, and I come with this realization, and I really bow myself in true adoration, I can only leave with a spirit of gratitude and thankfulness. And that when I leave with that attitude, it will go with me during the rest of the week. It'll go with me when I go home. It'll go with us when we go to work tomorrow. So to view it as just ritual, well, here's our traditions and here's what we go through, is to miss the value of our being here and being the same place with the Pharisees. And then he moves on to discuss their giving. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought you have done, and not to leave the other undone. Ye blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. So now, as we're looking at this, at anything and everything inside of their religious practice is game. There is nothing off limits that Jesus is not going to point out and ridicule. And that's what he's doing right here. He's ridiculing their practices in worship. That when it came to their tithing, they are being cautious of the tiniest of elements, down to the smallest of spices. Mint, the mint leaves, anise and cumin, powders. You're cautious and worried about that, but then look at what you're leaving undone. You have omitted judgment, justice, mercy, and faith. You mean I can go through this and it not be of faith? That's right. Missing these weightier matters, my being here this morning, will it create within me an attitude of judgment, justice? Will it create within me and within us a proper attitude of mercy? Will it grow within us a proper attitude of faith and trust? Or will I come here and then leave and then be like that wicked servant of Matthew 13? Forgiven a great debt by the king, and then goes out and takes a fellow servant by the throat who owed him a much lesser debt. Or, as we've already mentioned, will I be like that Pharisee praying in Luke 18? And degrade and ridicule this publican, this tax collector, that's in the same position as I am. And just as we've studied in other sections of this class, mercy, here we have judgment and mercy together. Justice and mercy. Mercy does not ignore the wrong. But mercy can understand the wrong and correct it. And the fact that Jesus puts justice and mercy together shows that they do go hand in hand. I can be merciful while at the same time still bringing about judgment. And verse 24 further shows just how much confusion there is on the values of life. And they're being inconsistent in what they're teaching people. You pay attention to this and you ignore this, that's straining at gnats. Your priorities are all out of line. And he continues to illustrate that with verses 25 and 26. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. This is what's going on the inside of the Pharisees, extortion. That's the kind of stuff that they make movies about. But where's that coming from? An excess, covetousness, materialism. You look good on the outside, but here's what's on the inside. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. Here's how they're getting all out of line and how inconsistent they're actually being. And he further illustrates this beyond the washing of cups and platters, which the Pharisees know full well about. Under the Old Testament system, there are a laundry list of laws when it comes to making sure that your cups and your plates are clean. Because you're not wanting to touch anything that is unclean and thus defile yourself. But all of that stuff that's going on in the physical is supposed to represent what? Spiritual. You're going through all of this process because it's trying to be emphasized to you just how much God is concerned about defilement. But what is it that defiles a man? Okay, it's not what goes in, it's what comes out. And here we have what is on the inside coming out. Extortion, excess. Sin defiles. And thus all of this that you're doing with your cups, your platters, your clothes is supposed to emphasize what's supposed to be going on inside of you. But of course, they've lost sight of that. So the Jews had to wash physically so as to approach God. And they were careful to not touch anything that was unclean. Because anything that was unclean, you'd have to separate yourself for at least 7 days before you could go back and be involved in public worship. So while they're involved in this, at the same time, they would not touch anything unclean and they wouldn't touch a dead body, but on the inside there was hatred that would kill someone. Straining at gnats, swallowing camels. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. When we are thinking about why the Jews in Israel were involved in this practice, it's not for the same reason that we have individuals today that take care of graveyards and they keep up the stones and mow the grass and all that kind of stuff just to make it look pretty. The reason why they're going through and taking so much effort so as to point out where a tomb is so that people could spot them easily and not touch them. Because if you touched anything containing any dead element, human or animal, then you were unclean. So here's what they're doing. Look at the extent, the level, the effort that they are putting forth to make sure that nobody touches a grave. And then look at the other things that they're doing inside of religion. Oh yeah, if you want to be angry at your brother, that's fine. You want to make a promise and then break it? Okay, yeah, that's fine. But buddy, don't touch a grave. Straining a gnat, swallowing camels. You want to look upon a woman, you want to look upon a man, lust after them in your own heart, oh, that's fine. Just don't act upon it. And by the way, there's a graveyard over here. Watch out for it. It's ridiculous. But don't people do that same thing today? When it comes to certain sins? Oh, well, this sin's not as bad as that sin. You're straining the gnats, swallowing camels. We have it being presented around us, all around us, in the denominational world. Well, you got these major points, and you got these secondary points. Since when? That's the same language. Well, this is more important than that. I didn't know you were in a position to make those kind of classifications. So even with this, as we're considering about ourselves, beautiful outward, inward full of dead men's bones, and of all uncleanness. They touched a grave, they would not be able to go to the temple, be unclean, and go into a symbol. But then we start thinking about ourselves today. Husbands, wives, did you have a spat with your spouse before coming here? And then to think that you can come in being clean on the outside, but then what's going on the inside? Siblings? Were you fighting and bickering with each other this morning before you got here? And then think, well, I'll just be able to come in, present myself as this, and everything will be fine. What's going on the inside? It's not about what's on the outside. And too much of what we have going on today, I'm not just talking about religiously, I'm talking about just society as a whole. So much of what is hurting us societally is this very element. Everybody is trying their best to put out a persona that everything is fine. Go to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. And everybody's posting pictures and they're smiling, having fun, this and that and the other. And what are they doing? It's the very thing Jesus is discussing here. You're trying to present something beautiful on the outside so as to hide ugliness that's on the inside. And then we end up doing that same thing inside of the church, but we end up doing it for a different reason. Jesus is showing to us that this is in fact a possibility. That there is the ability to be uncleanness within. So why do we want to play a game with each other as if that doesn't go on? Why do we start behaving like the world and we start trying to pretend everything's just fine? Now there's a lot of reasons for it. Because in order to do that means we have to be vulnerable with each other. I have to be willing to tell you about a flaw that I have and trust that you're not going to use it against me. And that is tough. Because do you think you could trust a Pharisee? Come and be vulnerable with them? Well, here's what I've got going on in my life, and this is what I'm struggling with. Oh no, a Pharisee is going to hold on to that, and they're going to use it. There's the problem, the issue of vulnerability, but then it's also the point that we've made many times before that, well, I'm a Christian and I'm supposed to know better. And thus it's embarrassing to have to come forward or have to come out or have to express some area to where I'm struggling. But that feeling, that emotion's not needing to be there. Now it's understanding to have it, but we need to push that to the side and we need to recognize what's going on here. We may be able to paint a picture and fool everybody else, but who are we not fooling? We're not fooling God. And that we are in fact carrying a load, we are carrying a burden, we are carrying a sickness within us that we do not have to carry. And so Jesus is pointing all of these things out with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but He's pointing them out with the aim and the guide and the direction that you can fix this. Here's how you're behaving, but here's how you need to behave. And here's what you can actually do so as to move forward from it. So it's not just a matter of cleaning up on the outside. We've got to deal with these internal issues and these internal problems that he continues to address, 29 through 31. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! Ye build the tombs of the prophets, garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore, ye be witness unto yourselves that ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. Now, they're not directly related. We are thousands of years removed from the events that Christ is referencing. But they share the same attitudes. So it's just like what John 6, with the Jews, you have your father the devil. It's not literal. Our spirits come from God. God is the one that created us. So how is it they are the children of the devil?
Their actions.
Their actions and their attitudes. You are their children. You share in the same attitudes and the same qualities and the same characteristics. And they will prove this in just a few short chapters. So you see how it is? Here's what people will say, and oh man, this sounds good. But I cannot just simply go by what you say. Your deeds, your actions have to line up with what you say. You garnish the tombs of the prophets. You take care of their sepulchres of the righteous, and you think that you're doing something good. And you make statements like this, but Jesus points it out. I know who you are. And it's not just thinking that He knows who they are. Other people know who they are too. You just consider the fact of them putting John the Baptist in prison. Herod, the Herodians. Where were the Pharisees? Why didn't the Pharisees come to his aid? We know that the Pharisees and the Herodians have teamed up. They're on the same page. Why didn't the Pharisees come and beg on John's behalf? Herod, you shouldn't do this. Why were they silent?
They agreed.
Because they agreed. They hated John just as much as Herod did. So you put that prophet to death, and then you want to try to say, oh, we would have never done this if we were back there. Not so. And then notice this phrase. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers. Not only are you the children of them, but you are going to fill up the measure of what they did. So now just think about this phrase. This is an Old Testament phrase, and one that they would be very familiar with. You have it being mentioned in Genesis 15:16, where God is establishing further His covenant with Abram. And he is telling Abram, you're going to get all of this land, but you're not going to get it yet. And here's the reason why. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Fill ye up, is not yet full. God is saying to Abraham, you're going to take this land, but you're not going to take it now because their iniquity is not yet full. What are we seeing right there with God? Characteristic.
Mercy.
Mercy. Patience. Long-sufferingness. Towards who? The Amorites, heathens, the Gentiles. And that's the language that was used about the Amorites. Now look who it's being used at. You talking about a slap in the face. But God is saying, yes, they are wicked. Yes, they are in iniquity. But it's not yet full. We're going to give them time. And you see it again, 1 Thessalonians 2:16. Forbidding us to speak to the Gentiles, that they might be saved, to fill up their sin alway. For the wrath has come upon them to the uttermost. In this context, we're discussing the Jews. We're discussing the children of Israel. Jesus says it, then Paul says it later on. To fill up their sins always. This phrasing is actually denoting to fill ye up then the measure. The iniquity is not yet full. It's like a cup that's containing water, some liquid, and it's right there at the brim. Well, it's not quite yet full. But when we get to this, when it is full, it's running over.
So, could you say that the people of Noah's day were at the brim?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
That showed by the flood.
And yeah, the water pouring over. So even as it's being mentioned with the Amorites, now it's being applied to the Jews. God is being long-suffering towards you, but that long-sufferingness is going to run out. At some point, the cup is going to get full and it's going to run over. So God was patient towards the people of Canaan. And here it shows that God is no respecter of persons in this very element. The very thing that he is applying to the Amorites, he's applying equally and justly towards the children of Israel. His people. And so the same phrase made to the heathens of Canaan is now being made to the Jews who now live in Canaan. Now just think about it. Why was it that the Canaanites, the Amorites, Amalekites, Hivites, Jebusites, why were they cast out? God just hated them, and thus they were removed?
They rejected him.
Okay, you said,
Unclean.
all right, unclean. What did you say?
Rejected him.
They rejected him. The 7 nations that are listed in Deuteronomy 7 that you're not supposed to marry. It's not because they were of a different race, ethnicity. Moses tells you, you do not marry them because they're idolaters. And they will lead you away from following God. God removed the Canaanites because of iniquity. Now here's Israel, and they are living in Canaan. Why is God going to draw them out? Iniquity, wickedness. God is just. God is righteous. And even when it comes to his own people. And just as we mentioned, we see a limit to patience and mercy. That cup is going to fill up, and then we have Verse 33, ye serpents and generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? It's not just a matter that you're going to be taken out of the land. It's not just a matter that you're going to lose your physical life. You are going to lose your soul. And this is what we have been trying to press on myself and on us to properly understand as we've been studying this information together. That if I will not follow these truths, I will be lost forever. If God would do it to the Canaanites, and if God would do it to the Israelites, and God is just, then what does that mean?
Do it to me.
He would do it to me. What we have being presented in this section is that there will be no ugly attitude type of people in heaven. Just won't be there. And that being lost eternally does not just mean refusing to obey the gospel. I can obey the gospel and then turn around and refuse to be remolded, to be remade, to become a new creature, to be converted, and thus I'll be lost. And we'll have to stop there because I have, even though like we're right at the end, but I've got some Old Testament connections.
Right at the brim.
Yeah, we are right at the brim. Yeah, we're right at the brim. We're about to flow over. But I've got some Old Testament connections to make with the following verses that we just will not have time to go through today. So it's being emphasized to us over and over and over and over again just how serious this is, how important God's religion is to mankind. It's not just a set of rules that He's given to us to just blindly dictate over our lives. The rules have a reason. The rules have a purpose. They're there for our protection and to help us. The rules create peace as long as the rules are just. And that's where the problem comes in. Is when we start setting aside God's rules and we start trying to make rules of our own. And then we no longer become God's house. It becomes a den of thieves. It's a place that's desolate of His presence, and that's what Jesus is going to move forward with in discussing the temple. So, any other thoughts, questions, comments on those lines and on those verses, what we got through in chapter 23? All right, then we will dismiss and